So my name's Graham McBain. I've been a Baptist minister for over 25 years. I started off in the 90s. And more recently, I've moved to Hartlepool, where I am what's known as a community pastor. And this is a great role. It means that I don't have responsibility for a church, and I've been released by the Northern Baptist Association to work in the community of Hartlepool with no Sunday commitments, no particular Sunday involvements, with the freedom to get involved with local community projects. The idea of this is that there's 30 something churches in Hartlepool, but church attendance is generally quite low. And so rather than just doing more of the same and trying the same model, we're trying something different. So being a community minister means that I can use some of the other sorts of skills that I've learned over the years as a form of ministry. So I trained as a barber a few years ago. I'm known locally in town as Graham the Barber. And one of the main ways I practice my ministry now is by offering free haircuts to Hartlepool men. And this has been a tremendous way of reaching people, of being in contact with people, and of just meeting with men with no agenda, no sense of needing to invite people to a church service or to a meeting or anything like that, usually in someone's home, purely as a guest in their home, and as a way of doing something that hopefully encourages them, is helpful to them, and to use churchy language, blesses them as well. I'm also a trained bike mechanic. So I work a few days a week at the Active Travel Hub in town, and encounter again many crossover people that need bike repairs or need a bike that we can provide for them. And actually all these things seem to blur together now. I find it hard to say when I'm being the community pastor and when I'm not. I feel like I'm the community pastor whether I'm cutting hair, whether I'm meeting people in town, whether I'm helping people with bikes, or whether it's something else. It all seems to work together now. And it's this way, it's almost like being a chaplain, being a town centre chaplain to people in Hartlepool. That's probably the best way of describing what I do. Very different role to as I've been a Baptist minister before.
Thanks, Graham. That's great. Can you just go back in time a little bit and just tell me about your personal journey to faith?
Gosh, yes. So the cliche is I grew up in a Christian home. My father was also a Baptist minister, so I grew up very much attending church. And that was just a way of life. I didn't know any different. That was what I did. I think I grew up in South London, and I was fortunate enough to be part of a church with a really strong youth group. And so I had peers and friends my own age that were all kind of exploring in our early teens, you know, that whole thing of growing up, but also questions of life, etc. Probably the most significant time for me was age 16. I remember this, me and my friend Keith, we used to cycle back from our youth club, and we'd stop for ages just chatting on our bikes. And I remember us talking and really talking about sort of what we believed, and this whole idea of, was it time to really kind of explore or make a stand as to whether it was true. And so we really sort of lent into what we'd learnt. And I kind of, say I made a deal with God would be a bit extreme, but I remember really saying to God through my prayers, I really want to believe this and I want to commit my life to you, and I'm going to do so and let you guide my life. And so at the age of 16, I got baptized. And I felt from then on a sense of something, I would call it God, something guiding me and leading me through life. And it led me on a very different life to what I might have done. So I worked in retail for many years, but I took the opportunity to spend some time in Africa, working with churches out there. When after we got married, we spent 8 years living out in Albania, working with churches there. And so my faith has really led to, I would say, sort of embracing adventure in life and sort of being able to do things that perhaps might not be normal and may have even hindered a career, if you can have a career in the church. But it's been a real experience of being in situations where, all I've got to rely on is a prayer and a faith that God is there and is looking out for me. It doesn't mean that everything's working out, always working out well, but that sense of I've got something stronger that loves me, that looks after me, and is helping me and directing me.
And you talk about that sense of something there looking after you. When you wake up in the morning, is it like a physical sensation having faith? What does it actually feel like?
I don't know if I'd say it's physical, because I'd say I wake up with the anxieties and doubts and worries that any 50-something-year-old wakes up with. But I think it's like a bedrock. It's like there's something deeper there that I don't have to fall back far to rely on. I think my faith, probably if I describe my prayer life, is more conversational than sort of deep times of prayer. So I guess I would say I have a run-in conversation with God about things in life, about challenges that are faced, about opportunities that arise. And I guess I would describe it as not feeling alone. I feel that there's someone there with me. And that someone is a friend, is someone who wants the best for me and is looking out for me, even when life can be pretty tough.
I wonder, when you're working in Hartlepool and you're in the town centre and you're kind of walking around and there's quite a few people there walking past you or towards you, I always think most of them won't have any faith at all.
No.
And do you ever get overcome by the need to engage with them, to get them to have faith?
Yeah, I used to. So I've changed a lot in my in how I express my faith, I guess. And if you're talking to the Graham of, say, 10 years ago, I would have been very much, I must share my faith at every opportunity. Of late, I've been really influenced by Celtic spirituality and Celtic Christianity. And so I have a sort of Celtic prayer that I say in my head most days. And the gist of it is, let me see Christ in all the people I see, or a reflection of Christ. And that really helps me, that I'm not walking through Hartlepool or going to do haircuts thinking I must, evangelise, or I must have a conversation. I'm almost looking for what's the reflection of Jesus that I see in the people around me. I find it really challenging, but actually really humbling, that it's not just how I'm loved by God, but it's all the people I'm passing are as well. And I find that really, really quite moving, that I might have a knowledge of God, but that doesn't mean I'm any more loved than the next person walking around as well. Sometimes the conversations I have lead to spiritual things, sometimes they don't. And that's absolutely fine. But I don't feel such a burden anymore that I have to always be talking about what I believe.
And has there been times when you've struggled with your faith, and how have you come through that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it'd be fair to say I've had real dark times. I live with depression and anxiety. It's something I've always had, and sometimes that's harder and sometimes that's easier. And at the moment, life's pretty good. But when the depression really hits, God seems really quiet. And there's times where prayers have felt just empty words into the abyss. What encourages me is when I look at sort of some of the great Christian thinkers and writers, many of them have that experience, of just like, where is God when questions aren't answered? Where is God when life is hard? Why aren't I protected from bad stuff? If I've given all up to follow God. And I think what I'd go back to is what I described as this bedrock that is there, that somehow gives me a validation, sometimes gives me a sense of purpose, of being, of just acceptance, regardless in whether things are good or bad. I remember my father died 17, 18 years ago, quite suddenly, and it was unexpected. And I lived abroad at the time. And I remember getting the call to say he'd had a heart attack and it looked pretty bad. Could I get home? and there was absolutely no way I could get back to the UK so quickly. And I remember praying and asking God, just prolong the life of my dad till I can get to the bedside. And of course, it didn't happen. And for a while, I really sort of wrestled with that, why couldn't God have done that? And faith seemed really low. But actually, I think even as I say that story, there was no miraculous sort of, no miraculous answer. I haven't ever had any great revelation as to why, except that these things don't happen. People die. We do experience bad things. But I think even in that pleading with God, I still was aware that the fact that I could plead with God meant that there was something there. There was something deep sustaining me through that difficult time.
Some people, in fact most people, probably experience life without feeling God's presence in it. Yeah. And you're a person who does feel God's presence. Yeah. So how do you experience that?
What, feeling God's presence?
Yeah.
Oh, it's I had a Muslim friend who described her experience of God as like a warm hug. And I thought, I love that. I couldn't say I feel that myself, but I loved how she described her experience of being with Allah. How do I think it's, if I was to use the marriage analogy, I know I'm loved by my wife. I know, we're together even when we're not together. There's just that sense of connectedness and togetherness. There's something of that in my knowledge of God. I think there's also, I perhaps see it as I sort of look around, look around the world, and just that sense of, wow, this is an amazing place we live in, and there's a force behind it. There's something behind it that we're all linked to. I guess one of the things I would say is, and what I love trying to do with people is, okay, so people may not have a knowledge of God, and I'm not there to proselytize and convince people of where I stand. But I do like saying to people, I believe God is good, and when I see people acting in a good way, and there's so much goodness that goes on, I think they're reflecting something of God in their actions. And so in that sense, I sort of see a presence of God in many places.
And you've mentioned over the years that your, I suppose, way of responding to the world has maybe changed a little bit.
Yeah.
How has your understanding of faith changed over the years?
Yeah, I think in the past I grew up in a very sort of what you call conservative evangelical place, where I felt that faith very much depended on a confession of faith, saying the right words in the right way at the right time. And, if you didn't say that, you were out, you just weren't in. I think God's far wider than that. I think when I look at the example of Jesus in the Bible, he seems to welcome and accept people that aren't making any great confession of faith, questionably even have a faith at times. I think God shows a great love for people, and I think that God responds to that curiosity that many people have when people are even raising questions, that God is there in people. And I think faith for me isn't in the past it was all about winning the argument, the apologetics and that sort of thing. I think now I'm far more happier to live in the mystery of, I don't know the answer to that, or that doesn't make any sense, or I completely see your argument, but this is what I believe. It doesn't have to be proven as such. That sounds really woolly. I guess what I'm saying is my faith just has grown to encompass doubts and questions. Yeah. And that I think makes it richer for me.
The world seems very divided and uncertain at the moment if you watch the news. So how do you reconcile your beliefs with all of that uncertainty?
I think, well, that's a really interesting question, because a lot of the certainties that perhaps I would have held on to in the past there are questions about now as well. I think there's certain certainties I really hold on to. I'm certain God exists. I can't prove it, but I'm certain he exists. I'm certain Jesus is real. How would I say that? Because I feel I have a relationship with Jesus. So I would look at the teachings of Jesus in the Bible. I'd look at particularly the stories of his death and resurrection. So I'm certain Jesus is alive. I don't understand how that happens, but there is a certainty there. And I think there's these certainties that help me cling on to all the dross that's happening around the world as well. I do think some of that certainty comes from probably some of the most formative years of my life were the 8 years. My family and I lived in Albania, and we lived with very poor communities there. And it really struck me that I think Albania was the second poorest country in Europe at the time. So living with poor people in one of the poorest countries in Europe, amongst the faith communities, they always started their prayers with thanks. And at times I'd be sitting in homes thinking, what on earth have you got to be thankful for? But that was where they started, because they believed that there was something greater than the reality of the problems around them. And so that gives me a certainty that there is something greater than what's going on. I think there's hope as well. I think you see little signs of hope that give me some certainty as well. This happened today. I was in a house where I was cutting hair, and they've got a little lad. And I walked into the house, and it was chaos because the lad had messed the bed up, and it was all messy, and he'd soiled himself, and it was horrible. And I got in there, and there was just panic in the house. And the mother popped the lad in the bath, and from a really horrible atmosphere at the time when I arrived, just when I was cutting the dad's hair, there's the mum and the lad sitting on the sofa, and the lad who's just been scolded and shouted at because he's messed up the bed is holding on to his mum, saying, "I love you, mum," and she's singing back to, and I thought, that's just beautiful. There's hope in this situation. This situation that was horrible when we arrived was turned around in a few minutes. I think that's what gives me a certainty that there is hope.
Yeah. And there are going to be people watching this documentary who are interested in faith and they may not have it yet. So if you were going to give them 1, 2 or 3 tips or things to think about to maybe engage with it, is there anything that you could offer them as suggestions?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say just before I give them the tips is I think curiosity is brilliant. I think even thinking about exploring it is a really good start. So I'd applaud that. I'd say that's brilliant. I think nature's huge. I think, go out and open your eyes, look at the horizon, look at the wonderful views and the things, the beaches, the skies we have here in Hartlepool. I think that nature is often connected to spirituality, and the Celtic saints made that connection a lot. So I would say get out in nature and just look around, and not look at it just look at it with the wonder of what's around, and start to let that speak to you. I think often we connect with the spirituality in that. I think the Bible is a wonderful way of connecting with God, and I would suggest look at the Bible with someone rather than just pick it up and try and read it yourself. It's a hard book in that respect, but look at some of the Bible stories and some of the wonderful sorts of parables of life that you find in there, and some of the wonderful poetry. Some of that starts to give a voice and make sense of life around. And I think through that, through nature, through looking at external things like the Bible, people start to build up a sense of there is something else other than me, which I think is a really good starting point.
Graham, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
That's great. Thank you.